All right, so just so you all know whether you're in the right place or not, this is our Fifth Thursdays Forum for Land Use Commission members and staff, and also anyone else who is interested in the topic today, which is our housing needs analysis for the region and proposed new state legislation that's currently kind of going through the legislative process. I just wanted to mention again, I really appreciate all of you attending tonight to hear this information. And as you know, we try to do these Fifth Thursday forums about 4 times a year for our land use volunteers and staff, really to provide an opportunity for presenting material that we know our towns are potentially interested in on land use topics of common interest. Our next forums that are coming up are actually on Thursdays. I know it was confusing that today was a fifth Thursday on a fifth Wednesday. But the future ones coming up next month, we're going to talk about zoning to address new uses on farms. Our July 29th, fifth Thursday, is going to be about economic recovery. Depending on the legislative session and how it goes, maybe we can also do a recap of that in July. And then September 30th is planning and zoning to protect lakes, rivers, and water quality. So, we'll send you an email again when we have registration open for those. And just wanted to let you know that those are coming up. So tonight, we are going to review some of the proposed legislation out there currently that could affect planning and zoning commissions. And Janelle's going to tell you a little bit more about how you can follow legislation that you're interested in. Then we're going to talk about our regional housing needs analysis, and I'm going to give you a summary of what we found when we were doing that. And that includes a town by town comparison of a lot of the data that we collected. And then finally, we're going to do our screening of our new short video. It's about 10 minutes that shows affordable housing in our small towns in our region and includes some interviews with the volunteers that helped create them. So that's what we're going to do today. And the first, I should just mention very quickly, you are all muted because there's so many of you and it's just so hard to not have background noise. So if you were basically at the end of each of these 3 sections, we'll take questions related to that section of the agenda. So you can either raise your hand at that point or you can type questions in the chat box. Those questions will just come to us and we can read them during that time, or we can recognize you and we can unmute you so that you can ask your question. So just so you know. All right, Janelle.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So I just want to preface my presentation by saying that we're presenting this information this evening, not to take a particular position on any topic, but more so just to be informative, to inform everyone here about some bills being proposed during the current legislative session. We're currently in the long session. It's an odd year, so that's based on the year. It'll run through June. It just got off the ground in January, committee assignments were in February, and now we're really getting into the thick of things. A lot of bills on the floor do pertain potentially to land use and could affect just the day-to-day operations of commissions and land use officials. So again, we're just presenting this information this evening about where you can learn more about the legislation and some bills that are on the floor that might be particularly germane to planning and zoning. Next slide. So the big one, SB 1024, it was actually brought to a vote before Planning and Development today. This truly encapsulates the concepts of the Desegregate Connecticut initiative. And the Desegregate Connecticut initiative, the coalition, it truly takes a position of calling for zoning reform in order to support equity and inclusive growth within the state, across the state. There's many different elements of the bill. This is what's on the screen is just a very short summary. And next slide. The next slide gets into some more of the detail. What's important to note if one actually pulls up the bill and gets into the details of it, some elements such as transit-oriented development, Main Street housing, it wouldn't actually be applicable to many of our towns given their population. So there's many, many details wrapped into this bill, some elements of the bill. So right now the bill, from my understanding, there are recent updates. It does have legs. So right now it's before just being edited and being worked out. But in total, what it basically is saying is looking for zoning reform for purposes of more inclusive, diverse housing options, more technical standards. Technical standards are along the lines of transportation, just updating some standards that have been used for really long, updating the Zoning Enabling Act, which give the zoning commissions their powers, so includes housing elements within that act. So many of the details are still up for grabs, but I think it's important also to note there is an element of training for commissioners in there. There are several bills that touch upon this. Some I've seen range in about 4 hours a year to about 6 hours per year. And I've listened to many of those discussions, and a lot of that is to be determined. Another element of this bill, that, again, this is all still at the stages of no decisions being made yet, but the concept of accessory dwelling units potentially being by right and eliminating the public hearing for accessory dwelling units. Another thing that has been wrapped into this bill is touching upon the use of character in zoning regulations. The notion, or per Desegregate Connecticut, the notion is that the term character has been used against people. So that initiative is hoping to reestablish it to mean physical site characteristics and architectural context. So many things all wrapped up into this bill. Senate Bill 1024 is an interesting one to follow. Next slide. So what I've seen just in paying attention to a lot of these bills is many of the bills, they actually include elements of other bills being proposed. So many are either redundant or seem to be really duplicative. What tends to happen at the opening of a legislative session is many legislators throw many things out there to see what sticks, to see where there's redundancies, and to see where things start to get conversations around or inevitably may get adopted. This evening, I'm just bringing to light a few of these bills, a few of these elements that might be really important as far as commissions go and land use officials go in their day-to-day operations. One, it touches upon, so SB 39 and HB 6107, they're pretty much in line. They're very similar. They take another look at the general statute, the Zoning Enabling Act 8-2, to promote compliance with municipal affordable housing plans. Many of the towns in the region are undergoing that process at the moment, and that restructures basically the Zoning Enabling Act to make sure that towns are actually complying with what they're proposing in these plans. It also, so House Bill 6107 brings zoning regulations into the foray and sets up a working group through OPM to really monitor that towns are adhering to their zoning regulations as far as housing, multifamily housing, and promoting housing options go. So those are two that are very similar but have some different elements. Another one to note is just interesting from a day-to-day operational perspective. House Bill 5161. This is out of an executive order. So due to the global pandemic, towns have been given the right to post their public notices onto town websites. This is actually a potential bill that might in fact become law, could potentially save towns a lot of money and just the way that they've been doing things. Another, just as far as timeline go, and again, day-to-day operations, is Senate Bill 5131, which would align timelines between wetlands and zoning. And this, from my understanding, when I was reading the bill, is just to simplify, following many different timelines, 35 days, 65 days, 65 days public hearing can get complicated. So this would really streamline them so that some commissioners, in fact, might actually serve on joint commissions where they're both an inland wetlands commissioner, also a planning and zoning commissioner. So this is just to keep with potentially maybe being helpful with aligning those timelines. So just a really quick summary of a few bills that are potentially on the floor. Many are at different stages. If anyone is interested, there's a very, very small website at the bottom of the slide. But Jocelyn, next slide. Jocelyn's actually taken a few screenshots of this website. It's very helpful if there's a particular bill that is interesting to you, that you can go ahead and track. Just subscribe to this website and you can enter the bill by the number that I just rattled off, or by a key term, or by a topic. So if you're on an affordable housing plan committee right now and you wish to follow the bills that may affect like the legislation around affordable housing, you can go ahead and input that in and then opt to get updates. I tend to get just a report of actions being taken. Do you have a next slide, Jocelyn?
Yeah, so this is all on the homepage,
Beautiful.
cga.ct.gov. And then down at the bottom, there's a bill tracking area, and you basically just create your own account, which is just an email and a password. And then you get this screen.
Perfect. Yeah. So I make many different lists based upon different reasons for following different bills. It's just a really user-friendly website. There's a lot going on. If you search key terms and look for things, a lot of bills will come up, and then when action is taken, it's nice to follow them. One thing that I didn't mention is, just given the pandemic, all of the hearings are virtual. So we as citizens have access to them. As citizens, as land use officials, as commissioners, have access to a lot of the testimony in ways that we haven't in the past. So rather than driving to Hartford to listen in on these public hearings, it's all up on YouTube. So that's been really interesting and informative. Eventually, I do plan to follow what's going on as far as land use goes and send out a memo to the attendees here this evening and to the land use officials across our region, just to update them on some bills that may have taken effect, effective dates, etc. So stay tuned for that, a lot to come. Thank you.
Yeah, and so the other great way of using this format and this bill tracking is that, again, it can send you a text message or an email when there's action on a bill, and you can search bills by keyword, and then you can see, when I went in, you can also search bills with others. It gives you bills of other similar topics. So like, this is just some of the bills out there right now related to housing or zoning. So you can see, again, this is just like I said this before, but kind of like the drinking from the fire hose part of the legislative session, where you're really not sure what's going to go anywhere. As Janelle mentioned, we do think that the 1024 is probably going to go somewhere. I'm sure that there will be edits to it and changes, and as there will probably to most of the bills that are out there right now. But again, this tool just gives you the ability to track whatever bills you are interested in, and also read the bills. I read House Bill 6107 and Senate Bill 1024 today. And it really helped me understand specifically what they're proposing. And again, as Janelle mentioned, specifically which of the things that they're proposing would impact, especially our small towns, because again, a lot of the things around transit-oriented development or middle housing really wouldn't come into effect for our small towns because they don't meet the population threshold for those to be imposed on them as currently drafted in this proposed legislation. So I think with that, if people do have specific questions around this tracking tool or general questions about the legislative process, you can raise your hand or type in the chat box. That's, again, what we really wanted to do is kind of show you some of the bills we're following, some of the aspects of them, and then just give you the tools to be able to actually read the bills and follow them if you want to. So Janelle, do you see any hands up or?
I did a quick scan. I don't at this time. I'm scanning again. Oh, I see George Clausen. Yeah, let me, I'm asking you to unmute.
I've unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, perfect.
Just a question, with all the rest of the slides and so forth, can you make those available to the attendees?
Yes, happy to.
Okay,
Yeah, we
that'll
will.
help because some of the things you're directing us to, instead of us having to write everything down.
Yeah, I rattled off a lot of numbers pretty quickly, so absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, we're happy to. We'll also post this recording as soon as we get the chance. We'll be on the COGS YouTube page, but yeah, we can make the slides available as well to attendees.
I just did another scan. I don't see any other questions.
All right. Well, again, there'll be more opportunity for questions, but I think we'll move on to the next part of the presentation, which is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And you guys are seeing this presented for the first time tonight. What we're going to present you is really, again, in a summary PowerPoint version. And again, there's a lot of data on these slides, so we will make them available to you. We're also going to put this in a more of a final report type format with more text and explanation that should be available and then in the coming weeks, that version of this information as well. So basically, this regional housing needs analysis has kind of four main parts. An introductory part, which really talks about some of the basics, like what is affordable housing, how much do we need, and then we go into the data analysis part of it. So again, being able for you to see town by town data on housing cost burden, the affordable housing stock that exists in our towns, diversity of our housing stock. So you'll see town by town data on that, brief information on strategies that our towns are already employing currently to meet housing needs, and then an appendix with lots of other information and links for those of you that want to dig in more to any of it. So this quote, our housing systems are experiencing the toughest challenges that we've seen in more than a generation, is from Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who was actually doing a study down in Fairfield, Connecticut. But this is true not just for the entire state of Connecticut, but really for the country. But I do think there has been really a renewed sense of urgency in a lot of our towns because many have seen an influx of new residents, which is great on one hand, but also is sort of highlighting the housing challenges that our towns have. As you may know, there's almost nothing available right now to someone who wants to rent. A lot of homes that were being rented were sold, and those renters don't have anywhere to go. There's also very limited supply of homes for purchase currently. We are also seeing that the waiting lists for our existing affordable housing, which were already long, are just getting longer, and folks on those lists are now waiting between 1 and 5 years before they can get an apartment. Many of our towns, many of you are on those committees that are working on affordable housing plans. 10 of our towns are working on them. And, we are assisting each of those towns with collecting town-specific data, like the data you'll see today. But this report really, again, allows every town to compare your data with that of your neighbors, and also for us to look at it as a region, because as we know, our economy and our housing market really is regional. It's not really town by town. So this allows us to really look at it from that perspective. In the report, there will be these quotes as well as others from employers in the region, again, about this real sense of urgency for us to proactively address the issue of housing options in our towns. These are from, for example, Brian Mattiello at Charlotte Hungerford Hospital, the superintendent of Region 12 School District, one of the local inns and restaurants in our region, and also one of our local banks. Just again, talking about it being really critical for them in retaining and attracting talent and employees to their jobs, that there be housing in close proximity that their employees can afford. And so that those employees can also be really part of the communities that they're serving. So the first question we always try to address, and I'm sorry to all of you that have already had to hear this many times, but the first question we always get is, how are you defining affordable housing? And so especially in these town housing plans that we're working on, we're really using the state's definition, which is housing that costs less than 30% of the income of a household that earns 80% of the area median income. So for us, that's Litchfield County's median income. And those are adjusted by household size. They're adjusted every year. These are the 2020 numbers. I don't think we have 2021 yet, but when we do, I will update these. So for example, our average household size for Litchfield County is 3 people. So if your household had 3 people in it and you made $73,000, you would qualify to live in affordable housing, and that housing could only cost 30% of your income. In addition, if you want that housing to qualify for the state's affordable housing appeals list, and I have that in a future slide here, so you'll see all of those numbers. It has to really kind of meet that definition of 30% of the income at someone for a household at 80%, but it also has to be basically monitored in some way or restricted in some way, so that they can be sure that the household that lives there is actually income eligible, and that somebody's making sure they're only paying 30% of their income. So that's kind of, it's either a deed restriction or, for example, another state program that is monitoring it, such as the Connecticut Housing Finance Agency, CHFA. That's what qualifies to be on that state list. And we do get the question a lot around why, for example, an accessory apartment that is somebody's renting, and they're renting it to somebody potentially below that income level. And again, maybe it's even only 30% of the income of that person, but there's no restriction to make sure that, for example, the person living there isn't actually at 100% AMI or 120% AMI, and or that landlord is keeping it at 30%. So again, that doesn't mean that those options that don't count on the state's list aren't important. I think they still are. And most of our towns are thinking about all of their housing needs when they're doing their housing plan, not just what will qualify for the state's list. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a question that comes up frequently. So the big question, of course, is how much do we need? And so these are just some data points to really help us think about how much we need. We do have about 18,500 households in our 21 towns that earn below 80% of the area median income. Again, that's the number that the state uses to say whether a household is qualified or not. And we do know, again, from the American Community Survey data that about 10,500 households are paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs in our 21 towns. And so they are considered housing cost burdened. We currently have in our towns in Northwest Connecticut 3,357 units of affordable housing according to that state list, which again is in another slide detailed. There was a recent study that estimated conservatively a need for about 3,500 units in our 21 town region. And that really represented the number of folks who are spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So again, just imagine having to spend 50% of everything you earn each month on your mortgage or your rent, and how little that would leave for everything else that a household has to pay for. We did, at the beginning of the study, look around at all of the existing affordable housing developments in our region, small towns and large, and we had over 1,500 households that were on those waiting lists currently. Approximately 345 of those households were senior households. So, and some of those seniors, again, are having to wait 2 to 5 years in order to potentially get offered a unit. So, and just to give that a little bit of context in terms of what we have been creating, if we think of the need as being 3,500 units or 1,500 units, over the last 10 years, we in our 21 towns have created about 84 units of rental housing and 20 homeownership units. So, at that rate, it would take us a long time to create this 1,500, to serve the 1,500 people, for example, that are currently waiting. Now, so this part of the presentation again is really town by town data, and I will make sure you guys have access to these slides. I'm sure the numbers are hard to read, but this just goes into more detail again about that housing cost burden number, which is one that we look at a lot when we're thinking about housing needs. And again, these are folks spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. You can see that I have to move my box here. The number column is the number of households in your town that are housing cost burdened. So, you know, Barkhamsted has 269 housing cost burdened households. And Torrington has a little over 4,000. So you can see what your number and percent of your total households are cost burdened for your town and then your neighboring towns. And we know that, you know, those are not necessarily people at 80% AMI. It could be people at any income range, but you know, for the most part, people don't necessarily choose to spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs if they can find a less expensive option in the place where they want to live. They usually would choose that. This is the 2020 Affordable Housing Appeals List that the state keeps. So again, this is what, when people say, you know, what does the state say that we have in terms of affordable housing stock? This is what we look at. And this adds up to, again, our 21 towns having about 3,357 units of affordable housing. And this presents it both as a number of total units that each town has, as well as the percent of their housing stock that is considered affordable. This is under a specific state statute, 830G, which you've maybe heard of before. And then they break it down into a few different categories. As you may know, if a town does not have 10% of its housing stock as shown on this list, as you know, meeting the state definition of affordable, it is open to appeals of land use decisions if the proposed development includes affordable housing. So that is something that a lot of our towns you know, look at and think about. So I don't think this will surprise very many people, but it is an interesting thing to look at. You know, our housing stock in Northwest Connecticut is really not very diverse. It's really a majority of houses are single family homes on individual lots with 3 or more bedrooms. And that's what we've got. So this table really just shows you the percentage of your housing stock that's single family detached and the percentage of your housing stock that's 3 or more bedrooms. So for example, in Barkhamsted, 95% of their housing stock is just one kind of housing, which is single family detached. And you know, that is the most expensive type of housing to own, construct, and maintain. And, you know, again, the county-wide average is 73% of housing stock being single family. Statewide, it's under, you know, it's 59% statewide. So a lot of our towns really do have such a vast majority of their housing being just one type of housing. We hear again a lot in our towns about the desire to have downsizing options. So, you know, a 2-bedroom home all on one level, for example, with not much, you know, in terms of maintenance, you know, lower maintenance. And again, as we know, there just isn't a lot out there that really fits that category because such a majority of our housing stock is basically one type of housing. Again, this probably won't surprise many of you, but home sales prices have been rising, you know, exacerbated, I think, also by COVID and a lot of families moving here from more densely populated areas. But this chart shows you kind of the 5-year change in your median sales price in your town, as well as the average sales price. You will see that in many towns, the average sales price is quite a bit higher than the median. And to us, that says that you've got, you know, some really, really high priced homes probably pulling up the average sales price. So again, over the last 5 years, there was an average change of an increase, the average increase was $115,000 in sales increase over the last 5 years. Access to ownership. So we talk a lot about, you know, a lot of towns are interested in having people who rent in town have the opportunity to purchase a home in town. So this really kind of shows you the gap between what a median household, the median renter household in Litchfield County earns, and what they'd be able to afford in terms of a house price, and your town's median sales price for 2020. So if you're a Litchfield County renter and you're earning the median household income of $41,000, you would be able to afford a home that cost $115,500. So the gap, there's a gap basically in every town. Some of the gaps are quite large. So for example, you would have to be able, in the town of Washington, you'd have to be able to purchase a home that was $724,000 more than you can afford. Even in Torrington, the median priced home is $44,000 more than what you can afford. You know, again, we know that new home ownership is often delayed, again, by these high housing costs in our towns, the limited diversity in the housing type. So if all that's available is a single family, large lot, 3+ bedroom home, that, you know, adds to the cost of the house. And then student loan debt is, you know, something else that I'm sure you've all heard a lot about. You know, the average student loan debt is quite high. I think there was some statistics around the, you know, average Connecticut adult is paying over $1,000 a month just in debt payments. So obviously that makes it more challenging to afford a mortgage as well. And this is, again, one of the reasons why there's a growing percentage of households that are renting rather than owning homes. Across the state, almost 1/3 of households are renting now. And that's the highest percentage of renting households in a generation. Many of our towns, and you'll see here basically the percent of your housing stock that is occupied by renters. The countywide average is about 19%. Again, the state average is 30%. Most of our towns are quite a bit below the county or the state average. And again, we think that indicates really a lack of rental housing options. We think if the options were there, you would have more folks renting in your town. In addition, a lot of the rental housing that is out there is quite expensive, and 45% of Litchfield County renters are housing cost burden. So again, that means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And about half of those, 22%, are actually paying, again, more than 50% of their income on their rent. In addition, in a lot of our towns, the increase in short-term rentals through platforms like Airbnb, VRBO, and others has really further limited rental housing options for year-round residents, and really increased rental housing costs, because some folks, if they can get the kind of rent that they can get on Airbnb, tend to go in that direction. So almost half of young adults, and where's my age bracket here, ages 19 to 34, are living in their parents' home. Statewide, this average is 41%. Again, this is much higher than it was a decade ago. And, we do think that this is not necessarily because young people like their parents more than they used to. We think it's, likely, again, an indicator that the housing options that they can afford or would like are just not available in our towns and in our state. Seasonal and weekend homes, again, many of our towns have, a significant portion of their homes, that their housing stock, that are used either seasonally or on the weekends. We do know this has changed somewhat during COVID. A lot of those weekend folks are now here more full-time. 9 of our towns have more than 20% of their total housing cost, their total housing stock is used just seasonally or occasionally. So this table, shows you, again, your town's percentage and number of units that are considered seasonal or occasional use, and then what percentage of your housing stock that makes up. So in summary, we need more housing options that are not single family detached. This could include attached single family homes such as townhouses, duplexes, 2-family homes, or multifamily homes. And again, those could be affordable or market rate, but we just don't have those options in our towns. We need smaller sized housing options for both folks who want to downsize and for younger folks who want to move into our towns. Again, most of what we have on offer are 3+ bedroom homes. Not everyone wants to own and maintain that size unit or home. We need more rental housing options, as we discussed, and there is also a pretty clear need for both homeownership and rental affordable housing options. Again, just looking at how many of our households in our 21 towns are currently housing cost burdened. Finally, the report will detail a little bit about some of the strategies our towns are employing to meet their housing needs. Again, many of our towns are doing affordable housing plans right now. Many of them have funding from Department of Housing to help them create those affordable housing plans, which are due. Every town has to have one by July 2022. Obviously, that's a way that our towns are trying to start addressing this need. Many of our towns are supporting their local housing nonprofit organizations. 13 of our 21 towns have one. And they're raising awareness about what residents can do to help, including donating land, funding, creating accessory apartments, supporting projects or zoning initiatives when they come to their planning and zoning commissions. Many of our towns also participate in the Northwest Connecticut Regional Housing Council, which we staff. It's one of the oldest and longest running housing councils in the state and has representatives from the local housing organizations that exist in our member towns. And then forums like tonight, our towns and our volunteers are really learning from each other about the strategies that are being employed across our towns, what's working, what's not working. So forums like this and others where people are really sharing information and resources and learning from each other. So the appendix of this report will also, again, include a lot of information, frequently asked questions about town affordable housing plans, links to our 3-part webinar series that we held the last couple months, the short film that we're going to show at the end of this forum, and links to all the housing data resources that we used in collecting all of this information, our Regional Housing Council website, our town by town inventory of affordable housing. And then Janelle's also working on a kind of summary overview zoning analysis for our member towns. And those of you that are ZEOs will get an email sometime in the near future to take a look at that and give us some feedback on it. But I think that's all. So I guess with that, if anybody has, I'll stop sharing, questions about the regional housing needs analysis, again, I will make sure to post that on our website, and this recording will also be posted. And we'll make sure also, once we get that report version together, rather than just the PowerPoint version, we'll get that out to you as well. Elaine, do you have a question? You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I apologize if you told us at the beginning of the program, but I was curious as to know, when was your data gathered?
Well, I mean, all of this data is, from this month.
Okay.
But each data source is a little different. So we'll make sure in the report that it will mention, a lot of this is 5-year average ACS data. That's like, 2014 to 2019. But that's just the most recent data available. As you know, we don't have data yet for this year, for example. But the sales price data is all from, the calendar year 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So it really varies by data source, by data, but we'll make sure you know where each of those came from.
The reason I asked is because we all know that in the last 15 months, we've seen the largest changes.
Right.
And the other question I had was, do we know if we are able to see the accurate rental numbers? For example, Roxbury has increased its accessory housing. Do we really have a way to track and count the renters and use their data to show whether it's affordable or not?
Again, the tools that we have available to us to think about that is the ACS data.
Mm-hmm.
And that will tell us, what the number of households that are renting in Roxbury, for example. And it will tell us the number of renter households that are housing cost burdened.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, any,
Jocelyn, I see Dimitri has a question.
all right.
As a planner, we have a two commission system, and so planning and zoning are two separate commissions. Planning Commission has been aware of the housing problem in our community for quite some time, but the main constraint, and I think this may be true for other Northwest towns, is that we're dealing with a soil-based or 2-acre zoning or something similar to that. And that system is pretty prohibitive, along with the cost of land itself, in being able to develop low-cost housing, cluster housing, condominium, apartments, you name it. So as a planner, is there any strategy that COG can put forward to help us in communicating with zoning how to adapt to a more flexible system that might allow us to improve our affordable housing numbers?
Well, I'm glad you asked. No, I mean, as you know, right now, we are in the process of assisting and facilitating the town's affordable housing plan. And that's really going to be kind of the best format for thinking through Washington specifically, you know, what are the zoning strategies that will make sense there? And also, again, you know, getting resident feedback and input about those zoning changes. So we're almost there in Washington, really, you know, being able to talk about some specific strategies. And I think I would just leave it at that for now, and I guess encourage other towns that aren't yet working on their affordable housing plans. I just think those strategies really do need to be thought of town by town, town specific way, and you know, looking at what your zoning regulations do and don't allow currently. And I guess that would be my general answer to that, but I appreciate the question.
Okay, thank you.
I see John D.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jocelyn and Janelle, for this presentation. I have a very simple question, and that is, I think it's easy for people to be confused about this. When we talk about housing cost burdened folks, we are talking about the costs of housing plus or minus any other parts of their housing costs, such as utilities.
It includes utilities.
So when we look at the 3-person family earning 73,008 something at 80% AMI, they would be spending something like $1,800 plus per month, and that would be their rent plus their utilities. It's easier for me to think about it in those terms.
Yes, so that does include all housing costs, you know, rent or mortgage payment, utilities, and, you know, insurance, all of that. And
Ongoing
again,
maintenance.
this
Right.
is a census question that you know, homeowners are asked whether they're spending more than 30% of their income on all of those housing costs together.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I see Richard Miller.
Yes, I have one gal mentioned earlier, this is a 15-month-old somewhat crisis. And I think once COVID-19 is in our rearview mirror and so many people are not anxious to get out of Manhattan or the big cities, maybe this issue will reverse to a certain extent. Maybe not, but in specific to Burlington, Burlington is the host to an awful lot of watershed properties. And one of the bills that you mentioned in the state legislature, I think it's 6611, talks about sewers being mandated to be built, and in particular, Burlington would have to build thousands of feet of sewers along watershed, New Britain's watershed, or Bristol's watershed, or Hartford's watershed lands, and we wouldn't have one hookup because it's all.
Yeah, so Richard, I want to avoid getting into, because
Okay, I won't bring up
I
Burlington.
mean, I don't really want to get into the details of any specific legislation for a few reasons. One is that it's all still kind of playing out. We don't
Yeah.
really know. I mean, I certainly haven't read anything like what you're suggesting in any of the legislation that I've read, but I can't say I have read the
Oh.
thousands of
Me neither.
pages of legislation out there. So I don't think we should comment on
Yeah.
that.
There's a very interesting one, 6611. I don't know if you've gotten to that, but I won't bring that up. But other towns have watershed property. But the other thing I have query about, maybe you could help us all on this, the definition of affordable housing. I'm not sure that it includes group homes. I don't think it includes at this point accessory apartments, and some towns have smaller houses that were lake cottages at one point that now are converted to full-time uses. I'm not sure that those get counted into it. So I'm
Yeah.
curious at if you could look into how the calculations were made by the state, because I don't think it's.
Yeah, I have looked into that quite thoroughly. And there is a very thorough explanation on the state's website about how they do it. Accessory apartments typically are not counted, again, unless they're deed restricted or monitored by some program that assures that they're rented to folks that are income eligible at 30%. And again, I would say that when in the towns that we're assisting with town housing plans currently, we are looking at the housing stock that qualifies by the state's definition of affordable, but we're also looking at the other housing needs in a town, including things that aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily qualify for the state's list, but they are an important piece of our housing stock, and they can be what I call lowercase a, lowercase h affordable housing. They add to the diversity of the housing stock, and they're important. Just because they don't count for the state's list, again, personally, I don't, that doesn't mean they're not important. So when we're working with towns on housing plans, we think about kind of the full range of housing options, and don't necessarily limit ourselves to thinking only about what counts on the state's list.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
I see George Clausen.
Oh,
You'll have to
Okay,
unmute.
There we go. I
Here you go.
just saw that. Okay. I've got three questions quickly. This infrastructure requirement, when you kind of, I've been reading about this desegregate Connecticut, it sounds like there's a discussion of one size fits all type of thing, which would require infrastructure expansion. And I'm just curious, has there been anything, I'm talking about sewer, I'm sitting on Sewer and Water Commission as well here.
Yeah, so George, what I can say is definitely if you reference that website and pull the bill and
Yes.
look through, I honestly briefly read the details behind sewer and septic and what they're proposing. I know they're taking a look at the methodology of what's been done in the past and updating it. I don't know the ins and outs of it, to be frank. So honestly, and I also don't know, as a result, there's actually a vote on this at Planning and Development today. I don't know what particular sections in the bill are looked at to be further edited. So at this point in time, what I suggest is just utilize that site and monitor the bill, because I won't be able to answer those questions about those details.
Okay, that's a pretty important part of what we're dealing with an old infrastructure here in our community. Has there been any information with regards to, this is the second part, the average land cost per acre? Is there any information within the 21 town membership that has that kind of information? Because that has definitely an impact on, cost per unit and so forth. So that's just a question. The other thing that was brought up about the affordable housing plan that's due by July of 2022. I'm sitting as chairman of our Planning and Zoning Commission. I haven't seen anything with regards to that for some reason. Is there a definition of objectives and so forth, what they're looking for in this, Jocelyn?
So that was the, that was passed in 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, they required every town to have an affordable housing plan and update it every 5 years. So that's where the July 2022, which is, I believe, 5 years from when they passed the legislation. And the information that's in the statute, and I can get you more information about it if you want, is not, there's not much in the statute around what needs to be contained in the plan. But the state has recently put out kind of a guidebook around, what they'd like to see in an affordable housing plan and the process that they would like towns to go through. Again, in addition, the Department of Housing has put out a grant program. None of our towns applied for and received grants to hire consultants to assist them in creating those plans. And so that's why 10 of our towns are working on them now. And, from our perspective, again, because the statute language is pretty general around what needs to be in a plan, we're, again, really taking a town by town approach and thinking through each town's housing needs and, what realistic strategies are for addressing those needs over, a 5-year period, which is the lifespan of the housing plan as currently in the legislation.
Okay, because I think a lot of our discussions locally has been we're at 10.85%, I think, of this CGS 8-30G. And we exceed the 10%, so that we haven't put much emphasis on it because we're already beyond that threshold.
Right.
But we have not talked about a specific affordable housing plan. So, all right, well, I'll have to look that up and see what we need to do. We're in the middle of finishing up our POCD at this point. So, okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to send you some more information around the that statute that was passed.
830J.
Yeah.
830J. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I don't want to keep you guys too late, and I do want to show you our new short video. It's 10 minutes long. And again, the purpose of it was really to be able to show folks what affordable housing looks like in our small towns and to really hear from some of the volunteers in our towns that have created it. There's also some nice drone shots from above of the housing developments, so you can kind of see them in some context. So I am going to go ahead and play that for you. And
Yeah, turn your volume up at home so you can hear it if you have audio going.
okay.
The Northwest Council of Governments did a study of all the towns in their region. In Washington, there's over 1,000 people who commute here to work.
People are moving away because really it doesn't make sense to live here. It's too expensive. And we're not going to change food prices. We're not going to change gasoline prices. We can very reasonably provide lower cost housing.
It's been clear over the past 10 years that there's a much greater need for rental housing than we supposed.
I think the average age is something like 60, and we need to attract young families or the town will die.
The state projections are, in 20 years, by 2040, the population is going to diminish by about 22% to 2,400 people. And the population right now is about 3,500.
People need to understand that in order to have a vibrant community, one needs to have a good variety of economic incomes in it. And we need to take care of the nurses and healthcare workers, etc.
The affordable rental housing is really the entry point for a lot of these young families. But it's also a place where kids who grew up here can come back and establish themselves. The fact is that the people who move here are doing the work that otherwise they might have to drive an hour to get here. And that's essential for the town. So it benefits the town and it benefits.
Yeah, and they're paying
Yeah.
rent. They pay it not more than a third of their income, but that's the way you can live nowadays. You can't pay more than a third of your income.
Where are we going? I mean, because this is essentially becoming, not literally, but figuratively, it's a gated community. You're going to, the population here is going to drop, as I said. The strain that's going to put on local government, as they're having difficulty finding volunteers now for the fire department, EMTs.
When I was looking out, I was watching people walk out to talk, go back to their homes, check their mailboxes. They tend to look out for each other. Kent Affordable Housing built this, South Common. It opened in 2003 with 24 units. We have a range of people from a newborn who was arrived just after the family arrived to live here, up to elderly, and they work all over town. Some of them are retired. The 4 acres here, they belong to the town. It's not on the road. The entry road was built. It wasn't doing anything but sitting here.
People who've lived here at Cougarman have moved on to the parcel program, been able to move into homeownership. Some have moved to Bonnybrook as they got older and needed a 1-story house. We've had a couple of high school valedictorians here. We've had members of the fire department. We've had people who work in the service trades. There are people who work as school staff. About as random as any other slice of Cornwall.
The new unit in the back has 2 3-bedroom units. Included in the folks who live there are some essential workers. There's teachers, there's a school bus driver, there are folks who work in retail, there's someone who works at Le Bon's, there's someone who works at one of the restaurants. We are really filling a need, I think, very much in the community. And many of those people would have to live, 45 an hour away.
At our town center rentals, we have people that are in the 20% of AMI, the 50% bracket, the 80% bracket, and then we have some unrestricted units. Department of Housing feels it's really important to have a variety of different income levels. The types of people that are in our rental units are everybody from teachers to some landscapers to a chef. Generally speaking, they're very much members of the community and have been members of the community for a long time, and they just need a little bit of assistance.
The moment I found out that I was going to be able to get the apartment at 4 Shepherd Road, it's a 1-level apartment. I really needed to be able to get into a space where I didn't have to do stairs, and it was much easier for me to move. I had a lot of back issues. I really don't have the words to express how much they have helped me and how much I appreciate it. They were really able to work with me as far as how much I was making and what I could pay, and they were able to get my son and I into one of the apartments.
The two houses here, brand new. The farmhouse, we totally renovated. Everything in it is new. Windows, roof, all new mechanicals. The way we set this up is we own the land underneath this, and then we do a 99-year lease. We are responsible for, when the properties are resold, to see that they are resold to people meeting those same area median income levels. The ideal thing would be to find other houses like this that we could take the land and subdivide. But right now, the cheapest house in Washington is about $549,000. Typically, there's around 70 to 80 houses on the market. Right now, there's 24.
Where we are right now was built in the 1980s. It was very controversial. There were stinging letters written to the paper. It was not at all certain that people would be happy with it. In time, and it didn't take very long, it was understood to be essential and respected and enjoyed. Our small towns are not asked to pay for construction or operation of affordable housing. Therefore, property taxes in our towns do not increase by adding these types of housing opportunities. Construction funding comes primarily through the Connecticut Department of Housing, and we're very grateful for their essential partnership in creating new affordable housing options here. Our property managers also carefully vet all applicants who wish to live here, including income and background checks. Most applicants have close ties to the town already. They're moving to be closer to work or family. The professional property managers we hire to manage day-to-day operations, like Tammy here at Sarum Village, are terrific.
And the other thing that I think is very important as grandmother is that we've also brought some children to school.
There are solar panels at Stewart Farm on 8 of the 13 units. The first summer, their electric bills were $9.12 a month because the sun was out beautifully. I've given you all the upsides. The downside is there's not enough because it takes 5 years to build a complex like this.
The good part is there are good people like Jocelyn and Maggie Cooley, who I work with up in Cornwall, and lots of other people, the back racks over in Kent. There are just lots of dedicated people that, put not just their financial resources, but, their time, which is more precious than anything, into, meeting these needs.
The Cornwall Housing Corporation has benefited from the generosity of people in town, from the Cougamans who gave the money that permitted the purchase of this lot 10 years ago, when we had to suddenly come up with the money to buy the lot on which Bonnybrook stands. People were hugely supportive.
Received a donation of another 4-acre parcel here in town, so we're hoping to move forward on another project fairly soon. Abraham Lincoln said, "Public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed." And so the public sentiment has got to be accepting, here's the vision, after we've had town forums and discussions, all of you have had input, that we've got to implement, this plan that we've come up with to try and reach the goals that we set.
If you want to be able to go out to eat and have somebody wait your table, that person needs a place to live.
The way that affordable housing benefits a town like Salisbury is that it brings fresh life into the town.
I hope that the video will show people sort of the banality of affordable housing in our towns.
It's a real benefit to the town, but to the whole region. And every town needs it.
It's not charity, it's an investment. That's my top headline line.
Negative voices are usually louder than positive ones. If your town is currently creating an affordable housing plan, they need your participation now.
So that's it. And I just want to give kudos. We had a young filmmaker from North Canaan, Ted Parati, that's his company. And he worked really hard on this short film, again, to try to really show some of the examples of the affordable housing that's currently in our small towns. And, really, again, hear from the folks that helped create those. So we do plan to use that video and show folks again during the town affordable housing plan process in the towns that are doing them. And we'll have that video also available on our website and the Housing Council's website. So I think that's really all we had for you guys tonight. Again, thank you for coming. And if you do have questions, let us know or contact us, Janelle or I, anytime. We look forward to working with all of you in your towns on addressing your own housing needs. And anything else, Janelle? And following the legislative session as it evolves, hopefully you have the tools now. Oh, Anna has a question.
Yes, I do see Anna.
I don't have a question. I have a comment. I just cannot get over how lucky all these towns are to have people like you two doing this work for us. This was just stunning this evening, the quality of that study. I'm just completely agog. I adore Virginia Sutton. I adore Mag Cooley. Those of us who are struggling down at the street level just can't appreciate you guys enough. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Yeah. I loved hearing all the voices and seeing all those faces in that video as well. All right, so I know you guys are all tired, and I really appreciate, again, your time tonight. I hope you'll join us for a future Fifth Thursday. Oh, Barbara has her hand up.
Yeah, I see Vincent too. I'm not sure. No. Okay.
Barbara, do you want to make oh, John has his hand
John
up.
as well.
Okay, our final few comments of the night.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Barbara, did you have a comment?
Okay. I was trying to unmute. No, I just have a quick question about the grants that you were talking about, that someone would come and help write our regulations. The town of Roxbury was not in that little video, but the town of Roxbury has had affordable housing regulations in their zoning for many, many years. And it's just, transportation, cost of land, those things just go against us. And even, it has to be a win-win for the builder too, to come in. We do not have a housing authority, have this Board of Selectmen, and the zoning chairman is on here, and he was also part of it on the Board of Selectmen, Jim Conway. We have tried to find people who would start a housing authority, and it doesn't go anywhere, unfortunately. But it's not for a lack of trying or allowing the affordable housing. It just has never taken off in our town. So I don't know what else we can do differently. You said that there's grants out there for people to come in and help write regulations. Maybe they could look at our regulations and help us, but are those still available or no?
Well, so Barbara, that was the Department of Housing grant program to help towns create their affordable housing plans. And I'm happy to follow up with you more about that. There might be, if there's a possibility of another round of that kind of funding. Honestly, I think a lot of our towns have, this has been an issue for them for a long time. And as you know, sometimes it's just like an opportunity presenting itself at the time when, other things are lined up. For example, having a local group of volunteers who are interested in that at the time when someone wants to donate a parcel of land or something. So, I think working on those housing plans for some of our towns and previous plans, again, have also led to opportunities that have led to housing being created. So I'm happy to follow up with you and the Department of Housing Commissioner about whether they're going to have another round of those planning grants. And we can talk about that some more.
Okay, I mean, I know another gentleman before, a planner, said something about, land based. We've had a subdivision for 2 years in wetlands. So all of these things together can work against trying to get something like this through. And it is what it is. But thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. I see John Higgins.
Yeah, thanks. I was just curious about the new legislation, the Senate Bill 1024, on accessory dwelling by right, because that's kind of an interesting sort of private sector of perhaps generosity and affordable housing. I know in Salisbury, we've had a lot of accessory dwelling public hearings recently, much more than we've had in the past. So I'm just curious about what's in that, or what should be in that, or what kind of restrictions could be had so that if it was affordable, it could be done by right versus a public hearing process and so forth. I mean, I think it just stirs a lot of ideas and thoughts by having accessory dwellings and so many properties that might be more realistic and made affordable than the public sector. I mean, we're going through some of that right now, which is very positive, but the statistics that you guys showed was quite alarming. And I just have this feeling that if John Q. Public was aware of some of this data, they might be interested in participating on a voluntary basis.
Yeah, I can send you, John, if you want the full language of that bill. There's just a paragraph on allowing accessory apartments by right. So there's not a lot of detail there currently. But I believe as currently drafted, it would require towns to allow accessory apartments by right. They still have to meet the other parts of your zoning regulation, I assume. But again, that's all kind of to be figured out a bit. One thing that we do see, again, I think that accessory apartments are a terrific part of the toolkit of creating different housing options in a town. One thing that we're seeing, and I'm sure Michelle will shake her head when she hears this, is that a lot of times the accessory apartments are used really as Airbnbs often, or as guest houses, or to house family members, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's still another housing option. Airbnb is good for our towns sometimes in other ways as well, but it often doesn't seem to be housing people year round. But again, that doesn't mean it's not another tool in the toolkit of creating just different housing options in our towns. And as you mentioned, it doesn't require a state subsidy or a nonprofit creating those. It could be literally each of us creating an apartment in our homes or over a garage. All right. And I do know Roxbury has done a lot on accessory apartments. A lot of our towns have accessory apartment regulations. And again, I think
I was just going to add how progressive the recent proposal for Roxbury for the accessory apartments really was. I had to read it a few times when I was processing the referral.
All right. So again, thank you all for your time tonight. And we will make sure to get both the recording and the slides from tonight out to you all. Look for it on our website or email me if you can't find it. Thank you all for your time and have a
Yeah.
good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.